5, 4, 3, 2, 1. My dear brothers and sisters, I have great pleasure in welcoming you all for the interesting webinar, fourth webinar of the second part. The topic is pediatric hypertension. We have already finished hypertensive heart disease, hypertension and arrhythmias, CCB confusion, and today is pediatric hypertension. Tomorrow, hypertension in elderly. I have my good friend. He's a senior consultant, interventional cardiologist. He does lot of tower, and he's from of Indian Heart Journal. He's a member of ACC Global Heart Failure Advisory Group. He a great pediatrician. Dr. Aswath is a pediatric consultant. From Cambridge. We already discussed, and I'm happy. And how to like banner ACP banner logo. We'll give the platform. We'll give the materials. So whoever wants, please contact me personally or contact Rajshekar. Rajshekar, I think some noise from your side.
No, no, sir, not from my side.
Some babies. Yeah, I've unmuted. So please support under webinars, and I think many people are showing interest. That's a good sign. But let me ask all of you who have joined. Please tell me honestly in the chat box, how many of you have purchased 3 different cup sizes? In the day, I made a request to all of you, please buy 3 cup sizes so that obese people as well as children can be recorded. Today is a pediatric hypertension. So I would like to ask all of you, whoever has purchased 3 cup sizes, please send me in chat box that you have done it. Again, many people are requesting for clinical imaging groups. Unfortunately, the 2 groups are full. The moment somebody leaves, we will accommodate. Even the Guru Rajan asked me, I said I will do it as soon as somebody leaves. And hypertension hits is going well. ECG is going better. I think most of you should also be active in our hypertension hits. And of course, today, please join in Kahoot, because today Kahoot is little different. Every day I'm trying to have different Kahoot. Last time you had a picture Kahoot. This time it will be case scenario. The pediatrician will take you through lot of case scenario, and if only you participate in Kahoot, then you will understand. So I request all of you, even if it is even if you answer wrongly, it doesn't matter. Please join Kahoot. You download the app and keep it ready. And with this, I have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Sarachandra to present his slides. I'll stop sharing. Please start sharing.
Yes.
Sarath.
Thank you, sir. It's a matter of great pleasure to talk to an entirely different forum of doctors. Are you able to see my slides? I suppose now you are getting it. Can you see the slides, see
Yeah,
the
go
patients.
ahead.
So from that group, suddenly we are here with a lot of clinicians, and it's a great pleasure. Now, hypertension in children is the subject, pediatric hypertension, but many of the facts which I'm going to mention here will apply to the age of adolescence also. So it's, most of the data which has been taken and many trials done, they included patients up to 18 years of age. And so you can apply a lot of these things to adolescent patients also. All right. Pediatric hypertension is defined as systolic blood pressure and a diastolic blood pressure. Let me just hide this. Okay. Which are more than 95th percentile for sex, age, and height percentile on 3 separate occasions. Now, this word percentile keeps on coming during this discussion. The reason for this is, unlike the adult hypertension, where you have specific numericals, say 140, 90, 130, 80, the pediatric age group, this kind of fixation is difficult for the simple reason, as the age and the body weight increases, the actual blood pressure, what is normal, keeps on changing and it goes on increasing. Therefore, we need to see, let us say, if you say 95th percentile, that means out of the subjects studied, normal subjects, 95% of them would be below that number. If you say 99 percentile, 99% of them would be below that number. These are actually available, the actual percentile, depending on the age of the patient, sex. Stage 1 hypertension is defined as SBP, diastolic blood pressure, that range from 95th percentile to 5 millimeter above the 99th percentile. Stage 2 is they are 5 millimeters above the 99th percentile. So, it looks a little confusing, but it is really not. I'll show you in another slide set, which will make it more clear. Now, look here. Now, age 3 to 11 years, age 12 to 17 years, this is differentiated. Normal blood pressure is less than 90th percentile in both the groups. Pre-hypertension is 90th to 95th percentile. Stage 1 is 95th to 99th percentile plus 5 millimeters. And the stage 2 is more than 99th percentile plus 5 millimeters, meaning that if you have this kind of blood pressure where the most people will come below the 99 and then plus 5 millimeters, that means you have got stage 2 hypertension. And our aim in most of these patients is, if you decide to treat a patient, you would like to bring down the blood pressure to below 90th percentile and make it as normal as possible. But then it again depends on whether there are comorbidities or not, which you are going to see shortly. Pre-hypertension is defined as SBP and diastolic blood pressure that range from 90th to less than 95th. Again, a repetition of the fact. Once confirmed on repeat measurement, stage 1 hypertension is typically non-emergent, and you can actually evaluate this patient over days or weeks or a couple of months before you decide to start drug therapy. Patients with stage 2 hypertension require prompt evaluation and pharmacologic therapy, because stage 2 hypertension is quite a bit of hypertension, and this is like equivalent to severe hypertension, what we call in the adult age groups, and therefore it requires early pharmacologic therapy. Symptomatic patients with stage 2 hypertension require immediate treatment and consultation with experts in pediatric hypertension. Research has shown that only 15 to 25% of hypertensive BP values are recognized by pediatric providers. Now, this may not sound good to the pediatricians who are listening to this, but it is a fact that measurement of blood pressure is not commonly undertaken in the pediatric age groups. In fact, even cardiologists, many times you will see that when they see a pediatric patient, most of them do not measure the blood pressure. This is an unfortunate fact. And, it is very important that we measure the blood pressure at least once when we encounter a child, so that, you are not missing some of those cases where the blood pressure is silent, blood pressure elevation is silent. Recognition mostly occurs over course of time in older, taller children and with recognized weight problems. yesterday I was talking to Dr. Muruganathan, and the feeling is today that essential hypertension, what we call essential hypertension or idiopathic hypertension, is becoming more and more common in all age groups, and even so in the and importantly in the pediatric age group also, because of the changing lifestyle of our society all over the world. In recent decades, an increase in primary hypertension in adolescents has been reported. The prevalence of essential hypertension in adolescents is different among diverse ethnicities, and it can be as low as 0.3% to approximately 21%. In those groups who have got obesity, and the Black people, for whom obesity has become an increasingly severe problem in these last few decades, and you know that their chances of having hypertension are very high compared to Caucasians or Indian subjects, and among them it is not uncommon to find relatively high levels of hypertension. Various factors such as obesity, diet, gender, and academic stress have been claimed as responsible causes in increasing the prevalence of primary hypertension in the age group. We all know that secondary hypertension is probably the most common cause of hypertension in our pediatric age group. But at the same time, we should realize the days are changing, the social milieu are changing, and essential hypertension, or the so-called idiopathic hypertension, is becoming increasingly common in the pediatric age group. For these reasons, that obesity is becoming more common. You do not have playing spaces for the children. The schools are small. Their diet consists of high levels of salt. Fast foods, we all know, are responsible for this. There is increased carbohydrate diet content in the diet. And academic stress, we all know, from class 6 or so in Hyderabad, you see lots of parents say, push the children for getting into IIT. There is so much of pressure on them to come up in very well in academic field, and all these things actually add up. Lack of sleep is another thing that adds up, and that's why this age group is becoming increasingly they are suffering from essential hypertension. Gender, it is generally found that in most studies this idiopathic hypertension is more common in boys than in girls. Interestingly, quite a few of the publications have come from India. Sundar, he is somewhere from Tamil Nadu. They published a high rate of essential hypertension in boys with a male to female ratio of 3:1. Dr. Bishop Mohan from Ludhiana, Dayanand College, he showed that hypertension was more common in boys, not only in urban setting, but also in rural areas in and around Ludhiana. Book et al. Demonstrated slight increase in the prevalence of hypertension in boys aged older than 13 years compared to girls. I'm going to show you more about these important publications. By and large, it is agreed that males suffer more from hypertension than females in the pediatric age group. Obesity and body mass index. The rising trend of obesity and mean body mass index in high levels has been plateaued in high-income countries. It has been recognized in Western world that obesity is an important problem. It is come down in the European countries. Unfortunately, the United States, they continue to have this high incidence of obesity, but the recognition has come, the understanding has come, but it is enhancing rapidly in our part of the world, Southeast Asia, and growing rate of obesity changes the incidence of overweight related problems such as hypertension in the world. The results from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, it was done at two different periods between 88 to 94 and 99 to 2008. In parallel with increasing BMI, there has been a 3.4% and 4.4% rise in the prevalence of hypertension. So the earlier period, they had lesser percentage of hypertension compared to 99 to 2008 decade, where there was a higher percentage of hypertension. The obesity contributes in multiple ways to hypertension: insulin resistance, activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, retention of salt, increased vascular volume, and consequent changes in the vascular endothelial function. By all these means, obesity contributes to hypertension. A study of 25,000 school children revealed a higher prevalence of hypertension in overweight and obese children in comparison to normal weight children. You can see 17 to 18% compared to 10%. 10% also looks very high, but today that shows the rising incidence of hypertension. Lifestyle factors, as I mentioned earlier, dietary patterns, physical activity, stress have main roles in the incidence and prevention of hypertension. So if you look at them, they are responsible for the problems, and if you control them, probably that is one way of preventing hypertension in children and adolescents. A diet with high salt intake, saturated and trans fatty acids, the low consumption of fruits and vegetables, nuts and olive oil was associated with hypertension in both children and adults. Now, the trans fatty acids and association with hypertension is relatively less well established, but high salt intake, we all know, has a very important role in contribution to the hypertension in adult as well as pediatric age groups. Due to urbanization, children have more consumption of processed food and energy-dense diet, which causes obesity and consequently obesity-related hypertension in childhood. Sedentary lifestyle and poor sleep quality promote hypertension in children. Elevated blood pressure in school children and adolescents can be attributed to high stress, particularly academic stress. Less play, more studies, academic anxiety, all these things contribute to hypertension. Genetic factors have also been shown. Gene polymorphism of renin-angiotensin system has been proposed as a risk factor for essential hypertension and its cardiovascular consequences. Aldosterone synthase gene, CYP11B2 polymorphism has been shown in a Japanese study to be associated with a rise in the incidence of hypertension. A study from China demonstrated high risk of hypertension in children and adolescents with single nucleotide polymorphism. In addition to renin-angiotensin system, endothelial nitric oxide gene polymorphism has also been cited as a possible contributing factor. Now, this is a slide that shows various important studies from India. I'm happy there is one study from Hyderabad also. You have almost from many places you can see. And if you see carefully, a study done in 1994, it shows the incidence was relatively lower, 2.8% in boys and 2.8% in girls. When you come to 2019 publication at the top by Patel from Indore, the incidence is 6.8% versus 7% in boys and girls respectively. Shows that there is a gradual rise in the chances of getting hypertension in different studies, and now it is an established fact. How to measure the blood pressure? This is an important area because if you just take the adult cuff, you may not be able to get the correct reading. You will not get it actually. So we should consider 4 main items while measuring the child's blood pressure: the circumstances, the child's mindset at that point of time, the sphygmomanometer, and the procedure itself. Now, some of these points look very simple, but they're all important. The child should take a 5 minutes rest before measuring the blood pressure, trying to calm down the child for 2 reasons. To avoid stress hypertension. We know white coat hypertension, what we call in adults. For a child, this can be a greater problem because suddenly the child, he or she is meeting a completely unknown person in the form of a doctor or a nurse. To build a lovely, kindly circumstance to avoid crying and anger, which may interfere with the measuring process. So you need to relax the child, give him sufficient time to cool down, and then only attempt measuring the blood pressure. The child should be in a sitting position, better supported back, with feet reaching the floor, and the cubital fossa supported at the heart level. All these things will help the clinician get the correct reading of blood pressure. Give him rest, allow him to relax, give him a position in such a position that he is supported at the back and completely relaxed and comfortable, and then attempt measuring the blood pressure. Choose the appropriate size of the cuff. It should cover at least 70% of the distance between the at the top of the humerus to the bottom of the humerus. If you take that, it should cover at least 70% of the distance. And then the bladder length should be covering at least 80% of the arm circumference. Then you will get the correct reading. Now you can see here that the circumference, depending on 10 centimeter, 15 or so, length should be 8 or 12, and the width should be correspondingly different. when you measure a newborn or infant or child or small adult or adult and so on. So this is how, so this is calculated so that the largest arm would still allow the bladder to encircle the arm by at least 80%. Try to inflate and deflate slowly. Try to feel the systolic blood pressure by pulse. Now, generally, it is mentioned that the BP should be recorded first time in all 4 limbs so that you are not missing any vascular abnormality or coarctation of aorta-like conditions. The cuff should not be applied too tight or too loose. BP monitoring subsequently can be done in the same limb and the position. Normally, the BP, as we all know, can be 10 to 20 millimeters higher in the lower limbs compared to the upper limbs, and it is slightly higher in the right upper limb compared to the left upper limb. The auscultatory method is probably the best way of measuring the blood pressure. And if you are using non-mercury oscillometric method, that's probably the best. And if you can, once you suspect in case of a screening kind of visits, then you need to confirm hypertension by auscultatory method. Now, causes of hypertension in children, there are plenty of them. Now, although I said so much about essential or idiopathic hypertension, we know that in the pediatric age group compared to adults, the chances of finding secondary hypertension are far greater. And the most important secondary cause actually are related to renal abnormalities. It could be congenital dysplastic kidneys, multicystic kidney disease, polycystic kidney disease, hydronephrosis, renal artery stenosis, renal vein thrombosis, glomerulonephritis, acute tubular necrosis, hemolytic uremic syndrome, obstructive uropathy, Wilms tumor, diabetic nephropathy in those unusual cases of type 1 diabetes when you encounter pyelonephritis. Cardiovascular conditions could be coarctation of aorta, Takayasu arteritis, Moyamoya disease. Endocrine diseases, once again, can be very important contributors to hypertension of the secondary nature. It could be Cushing's syndrome, hyperthyroidism, hyperparathyroidism, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, pheochromocytoma. Medications, drugs, toxins, poisons, so many of them can be responsible in the adolescent group. They may not be really relevant in the very pediatric group. It can be a cocaine use or alcohol use surreptitiously in the school-going children. Central nervous system, brain tumors, intracranial hemorrhage, raised intracranial pressure, autonomic dysfunction, neuroblastoma, encephalitis. Autoimmune diseases can sometimes, not uncommonly, start in the younger age group, and it could be SLE or polyarthritis nodosa, rheumatoid arthritis. Miscellaneous conditions are mentioned here. Many of them do not apply to pediatric age group, and there can be any one of those many genetic syndromes like Gordon syndrome, Liddle syndrome, Turner syndrome, and so on. Now, history taking is very important. A thorough history and physical examination are essential for the evaluation of hypertension and should be focused on assessing end organ damage and determining the etiology. Severe hypertension may be detected incidentally, particularly in those with long-standing hypertension that have acclimatized and there may not be any symptoms. So when a pediatric age group patient comes, at least once we should check his blood pressure, his or her blood pressure, to rule out hypertension. Presentations may include cardiac failure. I've seen more than one patient who had pheochromocytoma who presented actually with heart failure, and the presence of hypertension has been kind of ignored. Neurologic manifestations could be headache, vomiting, irritability, lethargy. Physicians, you know better than many other specialty patients, doctors. It is important to see signs and symptoms suggesting renal disease like proteinuria, edema, anemia, heart disease like chest pain, palpitations importantly, and diseases of other organ systems, endocrinologic or rheumatologic. In neonates, the presence of hypertension may lead to symptoms like emesis, repeated vomitings, and poor feeding. They can be non-specific signs of hypertension. Past medical and social history, including trauma, urinary tract infections, umbilical vein catheterization for some reason has been linked to early hypertension. Snoring, very similar to sleep apnea syndrome, which you see in older age groups. Sleep problems, drug and herbals use, and steroid usage, nutritional supplement use can all be investigated to rule out exactly, to find out exactly what is the cause of this hypertension. Establishing a prior history and treatment of hypertension is important as abrupt withdrawal of some hypertensive medications may cause hypertensive crisis. Family history of hypertension or endocrinopathies can also provide useful clues to the etiology of a child's hypertension and is often overlooked. Physical examination of someone with suspected hypertension should include a full set of vital signs, including forelimb blood pressure. As I mentioned earlier, if you do not measure blood pressure in all limbs, you may miss important condition like coarctation of aorta. Sorry. An accurate weight and height should also be obtained. Fundoscopic examination and a full neurologic examination, their importance cannot be overemphasized, particularly in the presence of hypertensive encephalopathy. The cardiovascular exam should focus on signs of ventricular hypertrophy, and even the child may be in heart failure. So one may have to look for S3, S4, signs of pulmonary edema, a shifted down and out left ventricular apex, tachycardia, and signs of right heart failure. All these things should be looked for. The absence of femoral pulses or very weak femoral pulses should at once raise a suspicion of coarctation of aorta. But we know in India, even Takayasu arteritis can sometimes present very early, and it can just mimic coarctation or what we call a reverse of coarctation. A renal artery bruise, edema, and growth failure may point to an underlying renal cause of hypertension. Now, this is a long list of science findings in relation to possible etiology. These are all very important. Presence of tachycardia can be a sign of hyperthyroidism, pheochromocytoma. Abnormal pulses suggest underlying coarctation of aorta. One can have web neck, elfin facies, moon-phased facies in relation to endocrinopathies and so on. So I'll skip through these slides quickly. And investigations. Diagnostic testing for hypertensive urgencies and emergencies in the emergency department. At that point, when they present with hypertension to the ED, the important goal is to acutely lower the BP, and detailed investigations can be taken up at a later stage. Initial workup for hypertension includes complete blood count, basic metabolic panel, including magnesium and phosphate, serum uric acid, fasting lipid profile, fasting blood glucose, urine analysis, culture, urine electrolytes, chest X-ray, ECG, echocardiogram, renal ultrasound, and Doppler. And in cases where a particular suspicion is raised, one can look for these advanced investigations like free T4, free T3, serum renin levels, aldosterone levels, and so on. Ambulatory BP monitoring is somehow not included in these slides, but that's a very, very important investigation in many of these patients where you have a suspicion that it is a white coat hypertension and you want to confirm, or you are suspecting a masked hypertension, that the blood pressure may be normal when he comes to you or within the normal range, but there are signs of end organ damage like left ventricular hypertrophy. So today, ambulatory BP monitoring assumes a very important role in the evaluation of hypertension in children as well as adults. So, some more of these investigations I've mentioned here: serum parathyroid hormone levels, urine serum toxicology screening, and so on and so forth. Treatment strategies. Now, here come some of the important lifestyle changes that are required. We know that weight reduction is the most important advice one can give, because if you rule out secondary causes, where of course the treatment is definitive and lifestyle change is not very important, but in those cases where the child is obese, is sedentary, and has got hypertension, advising them about weight reduction is a very, very important part of our advice. Regular physical activity. For adults, we say 45 minutes at least 3 times a week. That's the general advice. But in children where there is hypertension or a tendency towards hypertension, you need to tell them to do at least 1 hour of physical exercise every day and restrict the sedentary activities to less than 2 hours in 24 hours, like watching television or working on a computer. Dietary modification cannot be overemphasized. The importance of restriction of the salt intake. Family-based intervention. It is not enough if you just tell the child to take a different diet. Sometimes the adults in the family may have to make certain sacrifices for making a child fall in line in relation to salt-restricted diet. So indications for antihypertensive drug therapy are all patients who are symptomatic and those who have secondary hypertension before the actual corrective surgery or some other maneuver is undertaken. Hypertensive target organ damage is present, like retinopathy or left ventricular hypertrophy. And whenever hypertension is associated with diabetes type 1 and 2, today we know diabetes in children is not always type 1 diabetes. You have a full syndrome called the MODI, which physicians know very well compared to us. And type 2 diabetes is not uncommon to be seen among these children. I had the experience of treating a second-year medical student who had full-blown diabetes, obesity, and coronary artery disease, and we did angioplasty to him right while he was appearing for anatomy exam. Persistent hypertension despite non-pharmacologic methods. If it is stage 2 hypertension, you may not be able to wait, but relatively early hypertension like stage 1 or milder hypertension, one may try non-pharmacologic methods initially and then only go for antihypertensive drugs if it fails to control. So these are all situations, and one that should be mentioned here is CKD. Somehow it is missing in this slide. This presence of CKD at once tells you that there is an urgency to control the blood pressure. Start with a small dose of a single antihypertensive drug. This is the general advice. In adults today, we say that you may have to do 2 drugs. You may have to give 2 drugs right at the beginning. But in children, generally it is advised start with a small dose of a single antihypertensive drug. Slowly increase the dose to the maximum tolerated dosage, and then add a small dose of second drug and increase the dose of second antihypertensive medication later. Now, the drugs that are used in the pediatric age group are not entirely different compared to what we use in the adult patients. Angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, ARBs, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, beta blockers can all be used in these patients, and the other drugs fall less in the line, like the central alpha agonists and peripheral alpha antagonists, vasodilators, and so on. So we don't have too many publications in relation to antihypertensive medication usage in this group. These are the general lines along which one undertakes treatment of these patients. As I mentioned, class of drugs, patient's characteristic, ACE inhibitors, ARBs are first-line therapy. CCBs are also first-line therapy. Diuretics come relatively later as the second-line drug. Beta blockers may be avoided in patients with diabetes and also in those who are very prone to, who are athletic. Now, secondary hypertension is still a very important condition that is responsible for hypertension in this pediatric age group. 5 to 10% of the cases may be secondary hypertension. It is often overlooked and underscreened. There is a controversy over screening and treatment in some cases. Do you need to really go extensively to look for secondary hypertension? But I think in children, probably there should be no controversy. You need to thoroughly investigate these children for possible secondary conditions. You can see here the percentage of secondary hypertension is still a very important underlying cause, which you will find when you are evaluating a child with pediatric age group, a patient in the pediatric age group. But the relative contribution of essential hypertension is fast increasing, as I have mentioned earlier. Some of the case scenarios is, this is an 18-year-old girl who presented with recent pulmonary edema, was found to have sustained hypertension. There was no suggestion that it was paroxysmal hypertension. The point that actually attracted our attention to a possible secondary cause was persistent sinus tachycardia. We know that markedly elevated blood pressure is actually associated either with a normal heart rate or slower heart rate, but not sinus tachycardia. So because of that, we said we will evaluate her thoroughly, and pulses were normal, renal function was normal. Echocardiography showed actually global mild LV systolic dysfunction, which is a very typical feature of pheochromocytomas. Because of the excess levels of catecholamines, the receptors actually stop working, and they can actually develop what looks like a cardiomyopathy-like picture. Ultrasound abdomen at once picked up the diagnosis. We started initially alpha blockers, with which there was excellent response, added beta blockers later, and she underwent surgery and recovered very well. And now coarctation of aorta, a 12-year male child presented with a blood pressure of 150/90. He had bilaterally weak femoral pulses while the upper limb pulses were bounding. we could find evidence of left ventricular hypertrophy. There was a systolic murmur over the base of the apex with ejection click. A common accompaniment of coarctation is presence of a bicuspid aortic valve with an ejection click on physical examination. The electrocardiography and echo showed left ventricular hypertrophy. There was evidence of bicuspid aortic valve on echo, and X-ray showed cardiomegaly. Sufficient, more than sufficient data to make a diagnosis of coarctation of aorta. Magnetic resonance imaging has emerged as a leading investigation in the evaluation of coarctation. You can not only confirm the presence of obstruction, you can actually look for an aneurysm either pre or post coarctation, and it gives a very good information about coarctation, about the anatomy of coarctation, and can guide us actually what kind of therapy you are going to do for these patients. Takayasu arthritis, you know, it is seen usually in young adults, but it is not uncommon to see in Indian setting, younger children also. Presentation could be hypertension or stroke, and in some cases, congestive heart failure, often called pulseless disease, could be reverse coarctation or coarctation-like picture. Indian context, atypical presentations are not uncommon. A cause of hypertension is usually renal artery stenosis or a generalized narrowing of the major arteries. There are considerable advances that have taken place in interventional therapy of Takayasu arthritis. Conclusions are that hypertension is an increasingly common problem in the pediatric age group due to changing lifestyle. We still find in majority of the cases secondary hypertension as the cause, but increasingly idiopathic hypertension is playing a role. It is a silent killer unless treated. Important to recognize secondary hypertension, especially in this age group, because it is potentially curable. Always investigate the patient thoroughly, even at the cost of increased expenditure, because it is worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sarachandra, for that excellent and very clear presentation. Choice questions. But today, now our pediatricians is there. So we want to discuss about 7 scenarios, case scenarios. So now let us start playing Kahoot. Those of you who have already downloaded.
BP at a 20 millimeter difference. So in this case scenario, coarctation of aorta is the most likely diagnosis, because while congenital lateral hyperplasia will present with breathlessness, failure to thrive, it can come with tachypnea. It can never come with hypertension in such a young child. So the clue of hypertension makes first choice unlikely. Second choice is bronchiolitis. In a child with bronchiolitis, we will definitely have scattered crackles and bronchi, and there will be hardly any cardiovascular findings of note. So high BP in a 2-month-old child is a point against bronchiolitis. Similarly, for cardiomyopathy, are there. Either the BP will be low or it will be normal, which I have given very clearly. There is upper limb, lower limb BP difference. So most of them have given the correct answers. Coarctation of aorta is the most likely diagnosis.
Okay. Aswath, there is a
sir,
challenge.
over to you, sir.
Yeah, there is a challenge, in my opinion. How do you measure the blood pressure for a 2-month-old male infant? Hello, Aswath? Hello? Hello, Aswath?
Sir, I'm not able to see you on the screen, sir. Zoom is auto shutting off.
Don't see me.
I can hear you.
Yeah, please answer. What is the, I mean, how is a big challenge to measure a blood pressure for a 2-month-old baby? Give me some clue. How do you measure blood pressure? Aswath, can you hear me? Aswath?
Sir, I can hear you.
But please answer my question. Aswath?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah, please answer. I'm asking you, what is the challenge in measuring the blood pressure for a 2-month baby?
So the blood pressure records that we will normally use, the BP cuff, which we routinely use, we will be finding it very difficult to apply this and also to hear the Korotkov sounds distinctly. So in children less than 3 months of age, even less, yes, younger than 1 year of age, we prefer to use the oscillometry method. If the BP is supraphysiological and the child is in crisis, the better thing to do will be to install an intra-arterial line and measure the BP.
Okay.
That's an invasive method. Oscillatory method, very good. Apply oscillatory BP monitoring. It is very good as a screening tool. But both low BPs and high BPs, it is always better to confirm by some other methods.
Okay.
Getting the appropriate size curves and getting a 3-month-old baby to settle down to check the BP is not an easy task. So we.
And Ashwath, what do you mean by capillary fill time reduction? Capillary fill time reduction. Ashwath, can you hear me? Dr. Ashwath?
I can hear you, sir, partly. Zoom is constantly going off on the blink, sir.
Okay.
Your connection is coming and going.
Not
I have
my
reloaded at least thrice in the past half an hour.
Not my
Yes, sir, I
connection.
can hear you, sir.
Yeah, capillary fill time reduction. What do you mean by that? Capillary fill time reduction.
I am not able to see you, but I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, please answer. You don't need to see me, Ashwath. Please answer. What is capillary fill time reduction? Hello, Ashwath? Ashwath? Can you hear me? Ashwath, I think something, your internet connection is little weak. Ashwath? Can you hear me, Ashwath?
Sir, I will answer for this question.
Okay. Yeah,
Capillary refill time is a measure of the time it takes for a distal capillary bed, such as those found in our fingers, to regain color after pressure has been applied to cause blanching. A prolonged capillary refill time, it indicates the presence of circulatory shock. That is called capillary refill time.
Okay, in this case, it is reduced. Ashwath, can I go for the next case scenario? Are you there, Ashwath?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Your connection is coming on and off, sir. Right now, I am able to hear you, sir. Please
No.
go to the case scenario.
Unless our own connection is good, we cannot access.
Ashwath,
So our internet should be good.
Your internet is weak, Ashwath. I am good. So I think you switch off the video. You only answer questions. You switch off your video. You switch on only audio. Okay.
Yes, sir. Video is already switched off.
Yeah. Then your internet will be good. So I'm now going for the second case scenario. I will explain the case and then go to the second question. Friends, please listen. 8 months old girl with progressive abdominal distension, progressive proptosis. On examination, a miserable infant with mass per abdomen in the right hypochondrium and lumbar quadrant, right preorbital ecchymosis and proptosis. Blood pressure is 110/74. So the second case scenario, a 8 months old girl with progressive abdominal distension, progressive proptosis, exam reveals a miserable child with a mass per abdomen in the right hypochondrium and lumbar quadrant and right preorbital ecchymosis and proptosis. BP is 110/74. With this, I will go to the second question. Before that, we'll see who's got first in the first question. Anand scored 938, Afrin 922. Now I'll go to the second question. We have already given you the case history. Now you see the choices. I told you abdominal distension, proptosis, mass in the right hypochondrium, lumbar quadrants, ecchymosis. What is this case? Diagnosis: Wilms tumor, polycystic kidney, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, neuroblastoma. What is your diagnosis? Abdominal distension with mass in the hypochondrium and lumbar quadrants. Only 11 has answered neuroblastoma. Now, Ashwath, please explain the scenario and why you'd say neuroblastoma. Aswath? Can you hear me, Aswath?
Yes, sir, I can.
Yeah, please answer. Please answer. You explain this case.
So the 2 and 8-month-old girl with progressive abdominal distension, obviously there is a mass lesion in the abdomen. So when you have hypertension with a mass lesion from the abdomen, one possibility is an abdominal tumor. So Wilms tumor is a possibility, but then hypertension is an uncommon finding in Wilms tumor. The most common presentation of Wilms tumor in children is a painless lump per abdomen with or without hematuria. Hypertension is a very uncommon finding. If it does metastasize or spread, it will go to the liver first and then subsequently to the lung. It is very unusual for a Wilms tumor to metastasize to the orbit. Option number B, a polycystic kidney is usually typically a bilateral disease. So we cannot have a unilateral mass lesion in a polycystic kidney. Therefore, polycystic kidney also is a less likely option, and it cannot explain why the child has got proptosis or ecchymosis around the eyelid. The third possibility is acute lymphoblastic leukemia that can come with hepatosplenomegaly. It can come with a retroperitoneal mass. It can very rarely cause hypertension, but typically it does not metastasize to the orbit. So option number D is the most likely option because neuroblastoma is the master mimic. It comes as a mass per abdomen. As Dr. Sharad has already said, these are all intensely hormone-producing tumors. So you may get a catecholamine surge causing hypertension. And neuroblastoma has a favorite way of spreading either to the bone marrow or to the orbit or to the bone. So neuroblastoma is the most likely answer in this case scenario.
Thank you, Aswath. Now, friends, now I'm going to the third case scenario. A 3-year-old male with history of recurrent wheeze on frequent nebulization and oral medication for these wheezing attacks. Examination shows weight 17 kilogram, height 90 centimeter, chappy cheeks, striae over the abdomen, increased body hair, and blood pressure is 120/72. So here is a case scenario. A 3-year-old male with history of recurrent wheeze on frequent nebulization and oral medications for these attacks. Examination shows weight 17 kilos, height 90 centimeter, chappy cheeks, striae over the abdomen, increased body hair, blood pressure 120/72. With this, I will go to the third question. Let's see who's now first. Now Arun PP is first, Anand is second. We'll go to the question number 3. With history of recurrent wheeze, frequent nebulization, oral medication, chappy cheek, abdominal striae, body hair. What is this? Is it Cushing syndrome? Congestive cardiac failure? Congenital adrenal hyperplasia? Bardet-Biedl syndrome? Very good. 34 have answered correctly. Now, Aswath, please go ahead.
So in this child, this is a baby who's come with history of recurrent wheezing. The clue that we have given here is a frequent nebulization and oral medications. So very typically, children with wheezing are very often given nebulized salbutamol or nebulized steroids or nebulized ipratropium. And very often the oral medication is either Montelukast or steroids. After 2 or 3 visits, most parents recognize that when steroids are given, the child seems to get much better faster. And they also notice that the child is having a very good appetite even when the child is having fever or an intercurrent respiratory illness. So it is very common, especially among rural population, to self-medicate with steroids for each and every attack of cold and cough and fever. Sometimes parents continue to keep giving the children steroids because it promotes weight gain and appetite. So sometimes it's iatrogenic, but very often in pediatrics, self-medication with steroids which have been given once appropriately and many times suffer inappropriately by the parents themselves can give rise to this classical picture of a obese, chubby child with abdominal striae and hypertension and increased hair over the body parts. Like I told you, congenital hyperplasia is a very unusual cause for wheezing or for hypertension. Congestive cardiac failure could cause recurrent wheezing, but again will not cause chubby cheeks or abdominal striae. Bardet-Biedl syndrome is a condition where you get short stature, obesity, polydactyly, developmental delay typically in a male child, but again, hypertension is not a feature, neither is history of recurrent wheezing a feature of Bardet-Biedl syndrome. So congratulations to all the people who got Cushing's syndrome. This is iatrogenic Cushing's.
Aswath, what is Bardet-Biedl syndrome? Is it a genetic disorder? It is a metabolic disorder? It is a what disorder is it?
Bardet-Biedl syndrome is a condition where there is developmental delay, short stature, obesity. It's a very typical syndrome. It used to be initially called Lawrence-Moon-Biedl-Bardet syndrome.
Yes.
Now it's called Biedl-Bardet syndrome. It causes developmental delay, hypogonadism, short stature, and obesity. Like Turner syndrome, you have 4 or 5 findings. It's very easy to suspect Bardet-Biedl.
Aswath,
Polydactyly is a very important clue.
I think in that syndrome, the face will be moon-shaped face, right?
Correct, sir.
Okay.
They will have a very rounded faces. It's a very typical phenotype.
Yes. Okay. Friends, now I'm going to go for the 4th case scenario. A 4-year-old patient with tuberous sclerosis, refractory seizures on multiple anticonvulsants, routine blood pressure recording showed BP 114/64. What is the most appropriate next investigation to evaluate the hypertension? I'll repeat. A 4-year-old patient with tuberous sclerosis, refractory seizures on multiple anticonvulsants, routine blood pressure showed 114/64. What is the most appropriate next investigation to evaluate the hypertension? Let's go to the marks first and then go to the score. Arun still leading, Parvez is second. Now, next 4th question. Here is the question. What is the next best investigation to evaluate hypertension? Is it MRI brain, echocardiography, serum sodium potassium, renal Doppler study, and kidney scan? Which one? 19 have answered correctly. It is renal Doppler study and kidney. Aswath, stage is yours.
Yeah, the answer MRI brain is not a wrong answer, but the question was very clear. What is the next most useful investigation for evaluation of hypertension? Virtually 70 to 80% of children with tuberous sclerosis will have abnormalities in the MRI brain. Very typically, they will have tubers and giant astrocytomas, candle dripping appearance and all that. But that will not explain why the child has got hypertension. Similarly, option number B, echocardiography, will show rhabdomyomas. It may show abnormalities on cardiovascular functioning, but they cannot explain why the baby has got hypertension. At the typical presentation of rhabdomyomas is either in the form of an arrhythmia or a cardiomyopathy, not as a hypertension. Similarly, a child with tuberous sclerosis is not expected to have any abnormalities in serum sodium or potassium unless there is gross renal involvement. So the most appropriate answer is renal Doppler and kidney. Now what happens in tuberous sclerosis? These people are very prone to have what we call angiomyolipomas. So these are small tumorous malformations which come and compress the renal artery and produce a typical renovascular hypertension. As Dr. Sarath had said, a renal Doppler study is the most important investigation which will tell us that this is a child who's got an impaired renal perfusion causing renin-angiotensin activation leading to hypertension. So the most appropriate answer was renal Doppler study. The reason was to look for angiomyolipoma, which is one of the causes of renal artery stenosis.
Okay. Now the case 5, 14-year-old girl with 3 months of arthralgia, rashes over face and repeated oral ulceration. Examination revealed poorly built adolescent girl with extensive macular rashes, aphthous ulcers and blood pressure is 144/98. Urine shows hematuria, proteinuria. The most important next diagnostic test for diagnosis is, that's the question. I'll repeat the scenario again. 14-year-old girl with 3 months of arthralgia, rashes over face and repeated oral ulceration. Examination revealed a poorly built adolescent girl with extensive macular rashes, aphthous ulcers and BP of 144/98. Urine shows hematuria, proteinuria. What is the important next diagnostic test? We'll before that we'll see the marks. It is still Arun Parvesh. We'll go to the question number 5. The most important next diagnostic test for diagnosing this case is A, ultrasound, ANA, anti-ddNA, CT angiogram, anti-GBM antibodies. Super, super. 35 have answered correctly. Aswath.
So this is very heartening to know that so many youngsters and physicians are able to pick up the clinical clues to make a diagnosis of SLE. So adolescent girl with history of rash, with history of fever, arthralgia, poor weight gain, with hematuria, proteinuria, definitely this is a renal cause for a hypertension. So we have to suspect some vasculitic cause because we have other clues in the form of joint pains. We also have skin involvement. So this is a polysystem disease. An ultrasound kidney will show that there is a medical renal disease. It will not give us a clue to the cause for hypertension in this child. A CT angiogram of the aorta will help if you are suspecting aorta arteritis, which is very unusual to present with rash and to present with hematuria and proteinuria. It is typically capable of producing very high BP in the upper limb and very, very poor pulses in the lower limb. That's why Dr. Sharad called it the reverse coarctation of aorta. Option number D is anti-GBM, that is glomerular basement membrane antibodies. That is very useful in making a diagnosis of Goodpasture syndrome. But there the phenotype will be one of progressive anemia, dyspnea, extensive interstitial lung disease, and hematuria with progressive pallor. The oral ulcers, the skin rash are not in keeping with the diagnosis of Goodpasture syndrome. So what we are left with is the option of anti-nuclear antibody and anti-dsDNA. ANA is extremely sensitive to diagnose SLE. 95 to 97% of children with SLE will have an ANA. However, it lacks specificity. Therefore, in order to confirm that that ANA is only because of SLE, we should do a specific test in the form of anti-double-stranded DNA test. However, anti-dsDNA will be positive in only 30 to 50%. When it is present, it shows that it is SLE, and the added advantage is it correlates very well with the renal involvement in SLE.
Okay.
So the correct answer is answer number C.
Aswath, how often you see SLE in your practice, Aswath?
Every year, at least 3 to 4 children, sir.
What is the youngest age you see SLE?
7 to 8 years is the youngest age. Most of them are exactly what I've seen, sir. 14-year-old adolescent girl, typically they present with autoimmune hemolytic anemia, arthralgia, rash, poor weight gain, and sometimes the hematuria will be only microscopic. So unless we do a urine routine, and if we see a urine routine, we should never neglect it for pseudomenses or take it as she's having periods or something.
Okay. Is it a chronic hypertension or acute hypertension in this case?
Excellent question, sir. In SLE, they will have definite crisis, sir. So whenever the renal disease worsens, they will have an acute increase in blood pressure, decompensation of disease. Between the attacks, they will have chronic hypertension. So this is a condition where you will have chronic hypertension with acute exacerbations every time there is a renal shutdown because of a worsening of the renal state. And remember, most children with SLE will be on chronic steroids. So over a period of time, drug-induced hypertension will also start kicking in. So it's very difficult to say what is renal hypertension, what is drug-induced hypertension in SLEs.
Yes, I know. That's why. Very nice, very nice. Now I'm going to the sixth case scenario. 11 years male child, homeschooling for past 6 months. At 10 years, he was weighing 31 kilos. Current weight is 41 kilos and height is 126 centimeter. No physical activity, always online classes for 6 hours, games and games after 2 hours. Patients report no junk food intake as such. Blood pressure is 134 by 100. What is the next investigation of choice? I'll repeat. A 11-year male, homeschooling for past 6 months. 10 years, weight 31 kilos. Current weight is 41 kilos. Height 126 centimeter. No physical activity. Online classes for 6 hours. Parents report no junk food intake as such. Blood pressure is 134 by 100. What is the next investigation of choice? With this, I will go to the question. The score is still Arun. Arun is still leading. Koda is second. Parvez is now fourth. The question is sixth question for you, which I've already said. What is the next investigation of choice in this case of homeschooling for past 6 months? You do thyroid profile, lipid profile, metabolic syndrome screening, or cortisol estimation. Very good. 31 have answered very nicely. Over to you, Aswath.
So it's a very, very educated and very evolved audience that we are speaking to. I'm amazed by the amount of correct answers that we are getting on pediatric hypertension there too. So I've given enough clues in the history. This is a very common thing which is happening over the past post-COVID area. For the past 5 or 6 months, most adolescent children, they already are starting to gain weight because they are all getting into early puberty. They are all spending more and more time in front of screens and less time in physical activity. Even if there is no junk food, these people are not metabolizing what they are already eating. So when you have normal intake with reduced expenditure, your body will redistribute that fat. The younger the child, the higher the chances that you will have secondary hypertension. 10-year-old child who's gained 11 kilos in the past 1 year and who's having no other physical stigmata of a cause, we don't have to look very far. And in addition to hypertension, these children should be screened for dyslipidemia. They should be screened for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They should have their blood pressure estimated. They should have their thyroid checked. And they should also have a urine routine done. So while a thyroid profile or a lipid profile or cortisol estimation are not wrong answers, there has been no clue in the history for a secondary cause or an endocrine for hypertension, whereas enough clues have been given to say that this is essential hypertension because of bad lifestyle habits. And this is what we will see in adolescent youth because of the extended COVID lockdown and homeschooling. So the correct answer is to screen for metabolic syndrome, wherein you will be screening for lipid profile. We will be looking at the urine. We will look at insulin resistance as fasting blood sugar and insulin. We should also be screening them for sustained and acute hypertension with an ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Most important, these people should have an ultrasound of the liver because non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is clinically silent before cirrhosis sets in. Once it has gone to stage 3 or stage 4 of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, whatever weight reduction is done, it is going to behave like Wilson's or any other cause of cirrhosis. Chronic liver disease will be the end stage. So it's very important to look at the liver in these children.
Okay, after you do metabolic syndrome screen, how do you manage these children? What sort of a treatment you put them on?
So the most important is, like I said, this is a lifestyle disease. So while we cannot avoid sitting in front of the computer screen, at least during class hours, I've also said that he sits for 2 hours in playing online games. So we can exercise indoor, you can skip, you can run, you can jump, you can do Tai Chi, you can go and play shuttle in an indoor court in a safe area, you can go for walk, you can do any number of activities to stay fit. So homeschooling or not being able to go home, go outside to a ground to play is only a lame excuse for not staying fit regardless of the circumstances. So most important is lifestyle changes. Second is what we call the DASH approach. DASH approach is dietary approach to stop hypertension, wherein we restrict the amount of sodium intake to 2.3 grams of salt per day and encourage these children to consume lots of fruits and vegetables and sprouted grains and go easy on the starch, salt and cheesy food and salty food like chips, murukku, sauce, pizzas, burgers, all these high fat, high calorie and high salt snacks. If none of these measures work over a period of 2 to 3 months, then we start them on medications. Medication should never be the first line of management for a child who's got a hypertension as part and parcel of a metabolic syndrome, because genetic and environmental causes are far more important than disordered hormones.
Suppose
Drug
if,
therapy will be number 2.
okay, suppose if this doesn't work, what sort of treatment, medication you will give these children with metabolic syndrome, hypertension?
So we can use a calcium channel blocker or an ACE inhibitor. They are quite gentle, they are quite friendly, and they don't have too many side effects that will interfere with the children's day-to-day activities. Giving diuretics for a school-going child, which will make them go frequently to the restroom, is quite inappropriate. ACE receptor blocker, ACE inhibitor, or amlodipine is probably a better choice in these children. Clonidine is also one of the acceptable alternatives.
Okay, I will come to it later. Now, the last case, a 10-year-old boy with a headache of 3 months and seizures just 2 hours ago. Examination showed weight 34 kilos, height 136 centimeter, blood pressure 132/90, increased pallus length and hirsutism. Testis volume is pretuberal. And what is the most likely diagnosis? I'll repeat the 7th case scenario. Here is a young boy, 10-year-old boy with headache of 3 months duration, seizures 2 hours ago. Examination 34 kilos, height is 136, BP 132/90, increased pallus, penis length and hirsutism. Testis volume is prepubertal. And what is the most likely diagnosis? So with this, I will go to the last question. Still Arun is leading, Kwadai second, Shah is third. Now we'll go to the question as such. What is the most likely diagnosis of this boy with headache 3 months, seizures 2 hours ago, weight 34 kilos, hirsutism, increased penis length? Graves, Cushing syndrome, Cushing disease, precocious puberty, adrenal hyperplasia. Good, 20 has answered. Okay, Aswath?
So I'll go with the answers one by one, sir. Graves' disease. Graves' disease is a cause for hypertension with tachycardia, but the clue for the clinician will be the presence of tremors, proptosis, ophthalmopathy, and the fact that there will be a wide pulse pressure. Typically, Graves' disease will have a wide pulse pressure. Here, the pulse pressure is narrow. So, Graves' disease is a less likely answer. Cushing syndrome will have increased weight gain. They will have increased truncal obesity with peripheral wasting, lemon or matchstick appearance. They will have hirsutism and striae, but they will not have increased phallus length, and they will not have headache and seizures as part and parcel of hypertension unless it is in the advanced stages. So the point against Cushing syndrome is the increased phallus length. If it is a precocious puberty, we can explain increased body weight, you can increase body height, you can explain increased phallus length, but I have given a specific clue saying the testis is prepubertal. Any child who's got an increased penile length and who's appearing advanced sexual maturity for his age, if there is only one thing you will look at, please look at the testis. If the testis is large and the penis is large, we are talking about a central cause. If the penis is large but the testis is small, this child is having exposure to androgen from some other source. It is not testicular origin. It is not testosterone which is driving this disease. So this child is having isosexual pseudo-precocity. And why is he having hypertension? The most typical type of congenital adrenal hyperplasia is 21-hydroxylase deficiency, where aldosterone is low. However, 5 to 10% of adrenal hyperplasia can be because of 11-beta hydroxylase, where they have deoxycortisol elevation. Deoxycortisol elevation will lead to a pseudo hyperaldosteronism like picture. So because this deoxycorticosterone and deoxycortisol have some degree of aldosterone like action, you will see hypokalemia, you will see hypertension, and because of the advanced production of adrenal steroids like dehydroepiandrosterone, these people will also have advanced sexual maturity. I'm really impressed that really 20 people could think through this twister and come up with the correct diagnosis. The correct diagnosis is 11-beta hydroxylase type of adrenal hyperplasia. That's the correct answer.
Aswath, excellent Aswath. In the 7th case scenario, you have covered almost all the secondary cause of hypertension. Really,
Correct.
very good. And very good demonstration of cases and the differential diagnosis and your explanation. Thank you very much. I will come to you later. Now we'll see the score. Who's first? Still Arun, or now Magesh is third. Kodai is second. And who's first now? Same Arun. Arun from the beginning was first. Then Yusuf is fourth. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we'll stop this Kahoot. Now I'll go to the panelist. Dr. Sarachandra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now tell me your impression about the case scenario, what Aswath described, your experience in whatever he said, your add-on points, whatever he said.
Yeah, I must first congratulate you for a very good session. Beautiful. I'm very impressed. And Dr. Aswath's explanations and discussion about the various choices is exceedingly good. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
And yeah. And I agree with you. Although I'm reminded of my MD days. In cardiology practice, we don't differentiate so much between different diagnoses. Our disease is mostly 1 or 2 diagnoses only we deal with. So this is a very good session. I really don't have much to add. The various conditions are discussed very well.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sarachandra. Now I'll come to the question, Aswath. What symptoms would be seen in children common during elevated blood pressure, and any difference with acute adult scenario?
Excellent question, sir, because this is one of the most important points I want to highlight. Most children with hypertension will not have any symptom attributable to hypertension. So most hypertension is incidentally picked up. When you have a child with an SLE-like condition, or a child comes with an acute cardiogenic shock, or when a child has got a cardiorespiratory distress, it is logical for us to check blood pressure. But there are so many children who have hypertension from secondary causes who will go without a diagnosis because nobody bothered to check the blood pressure. Therefore, the IAP and the AAP guidelines recently say every child after the age of 3 years should have at least 1 annual blood pressure checked up, regardless of whether they are well appearing or sick. So universal blood pressure screening is perhaps the most cost-effective way for picking up hypertension in the children. If we are talking about causes, the best way I would approach or advise our correspondents or people who are taking part to look at it is go systematically from head to foot. In the head, you can have headache, you can have convulsions, you have this very peculiar condition where you have loss of vision with altered sensorium. That is called posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome, where the occipital cortex will experience regional ischemia. So children will come and say, Amma, I'm having a severe headache and suddenly I can see nothing. After a couple of minutes, I'm able to see. When you hear this history of headache with transient loss of vision, please do not think of a transient ischemic attack or a migraine or some other obtuse reason. Please check the blood pressure because you could save the child's brain. The second presentation is a hypertencephalopathy. A new acute loss of consciousness, seizures, headache. It can also manifest as an intracranial hemorrhage. In the eye, it can be in the manifestation of papilledema. The child may have loss of vision or blurring of vision or diplopia. In the chest, it could come as acute cardiogenic shock. It could come as acute pulmonary edema. In the liver, it could manifest as an acute congestive hepatopathy. In the kidney, it can cause a acute renal blood pressure increase to go into acute kidney injury. So these are all the ways an acute hypertensive crisis or emergency could present. But I repeatedly want to stress, if you want to treat childhood hypertension, please look for it. Do not wait for symptoms to come.
Okay, having committed that, how do you measure the correct blood pressure? It is not possible for the child to sit on a stool and then his feet flat in the. Is it better to take a lying posture BP? How do you take
It is-
accurate measurement?
Right, sir. When we are looking at screening, we understand that because of white coat hypertension, it is very easy. It's very easy to say monitor blood pressure. But in practical reality, the child who starts screaming at the sight of the physician or the white coat or the hospital milieu, it is very difficult to sedate the child or keep the child quiet enough to get a resting blood pressure. So some degree of blood pressure elevation will be acceptable as part and parcel of fear, anxiety, stress. Having said that, if the blood pressure is out of range, any blood pressure above 90th centile for age and sex and height should be red flag. We can ask the parents to come for a couple of settings. We don't have to raise the parents' BP by saying your BP is having hypertension. They will get the shock of their lives. So it is better to record the BP and ask the child to come 2 or 3 settings. As regards the method, intra-arterial BP is the most accurate but very impractical. Sitting BP with the hand held by the side at the level of the heart, very nice in the textbook, very difficult to achieve in clinical practice, but using appropriate age, appropriate blood pressure cuff is the most appropriate, most advised, most acceptable method using the traditional sphygmomanometry without mercury. The third, acceptable, what is widely available, what is acceptable at least as a screening method is the oscillometric method. I repeat, oscillometric method is unreliable at the extremes, either low or high, because it measures only the mean blood pressure and tries to extrapolate systolic and diastolic. Whereas when we do the classical auscultatory method, we are looking at precise systolic and diastolic measurements.
Okay. Don't you do home blood pressure monitoring and ambulatory blood pressure monitoring for children, Aswath?
We do advise it, sir. When the child is having sustained hypertension, we have two phenomena. One is called white coat hypertension, where the child experiences a 10 to 20 millimeters increase in mean arterial pressure in the hospital setting, but in the community setting, BP is normal. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has come with a new concept called masked hypertension, where the child's BP is normal in the clinical setting, but when he goes into the community, the BP goes up. So such a child who is in the community, if you don't rely on ambulatory BP method, or if the parent is not a staff nurse or some healthcare professional who can reliably measure the BP, this masked hypertension group, which is probably a significant amount, will be completely missed. So ambulatory blood pressure monitoring is cumbersome, but like Holter monitoring, we sometimes pick up ECG arrhythmias only when we look at a Holter monitor. One isolated reading of an ECG is not enough to rule in or rule out most arrhythmias. So ambulatory BP is to be strongly encouraged and endorsed.
Aswath, I am a very, very good supporter of home blood pressure monitoring. I have said many times, even in pediatrics, we can use home blood pressure monitoring. Your comments?
Yes, sir, we should. But every time the value is out of range, we should always supplement it with the auscultatory method. It is good for screening, but we cannot take actions alone based on that home monitoring.
Okay. In a normal OP, in a pediatric OP, if you get a essential hypertension or the primary hypertension, how do you start the treatment?
Like I told you, essential hypertension, the current guidelines as late as 2019 guidelines say, if a child has got an age of more than 6 years, if the child's physical examination is reassuring, there are no red flag symptoms or signs to suggest a secondary hypertension. If there is a family history of hypertension and the child's body mass index is more than 23 kg per meter squared, you can definitely do a very, very simple urine analysis, ultrasound kidney, 4-limb BP checkup, one echo to look at the left ventricular hypertrophy to know whether it is an acute BP or it is a chronic long-standing hypertension, and start lifestyle modifications. Give it a trial for 2 months. Ensure that the patient understands the importance of DASH diet and weight loss and dietary restrictions of high carbs, high salt, high fat diet. If nothing else works, we do start hypertension management with drugs, but that has to be delayed by at least 2 months so that the parents are given a chance for non-pharmacological methods.
What is the drug you start? Monotherapy or combination therapy? How do you start and how do you
For
control?
pediatrics, definitely we start with monotherapy, sir. If the child doesn't have bronchial asthma or diabetes or any comorbid conditions, we are very happy to start them on beta blockers. If there is a comorbid condition which precludes the use of beta blocker, we are very happy to give them calcium channel blockers or ACE inhibitors.
What
We
beta
do
blocker?
not use,
What beta blocker you give?
we use metoprolol or retinol also.
You still use atenolol?
Yes, sir, or metoprolol.
Okay, okay. And do you get any causes for refractory pediatric hypertension in these situations? Is there any such called resistant hypertension or a refractory pediatric hypertension in a
Refractory
primary?
sorry, sir.
Yeah, in a primary case, not a secondary case.
In a primary hypertension, it is very unusual to see refractory hypertension. If we see refractory hypertension, we really start digging deep to see whether this child has got a renin-generated hypertension, whether the aldosterone levels are high, whether it is Liddle syndrome, or whether it is one of the monogenic forms of syndromic hypertension, like a syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. We really will have to investigate child both from the renal angle as well as from the endocrine causes. Because to label it primary hypertension, we should have done some basic minimum workup. The simple run-of-the-mill primary hypertension will not pose a challenge. If it poses a challenge, I would not assume it is primary hypertension. I'll probably order tier 2 or tier 3 investigation.
Sarachandra, have you come across any pediatric hypertension where you have to do intervention in a renal artery or
Yeah, definitely. Takayasu's arthritis not uncommonly presents in that age group, and more than few patients I've treated where we have done renal angioplasty, and they do very well. Of course, the prognosis in the long run depends on so many other factors, the extent of involvement with the Takayasu's arthritis. I've seen even a coronary artery involvement in a case of Takayasu's at the age of around 12. In Hyderabad, there is a very famous patient who underwent proper bypass surgery for LM stenosis, left main stenosis, due to Takayasu's at the age of 10 years. And severe hypercholesterolemia can also present in the, if it is homozygous, especially can present in the pediatric age group with extensive involvement of coronary arteries, renal arteries, carotids, and so on. So once in a while, although rarely, you can see hypertension in this setup. The interventions are possible for these patients. I have another patient in whom we did left main intervention for a girl about 14 due to Takayasu's, and later we opened the circumflex artery, and she did very well. So it is not uncommon to do interventions. They may be required for coarctation of aorta, for renal artery stenosis, and not uncommonly in India, atypical presentation of Takayasu's occurs. The stenosis is in the abdominal aorta or thoracic aorta, far away from the classical coarctation site, extremely severe narrowing with increase in systolic pressure and diastolic pressure in the proximal part of the vessel. And by putting a stent, if it is done relatively early, you may have excellent response to hypertension. But Takayasu, sometimes the response to interventions may not be very good because there can be extensive involvement of the systemic arteries and hypertension may be due to less than adequate space, as they say, for the circulating blood volume.
Sarachandra, you are doing echoes day in and day out. Have you come across any strange findings in children? Some myxomas, some lipomas, something like, which is there in the LVH or in the echo? Any specific interesting case you have come across in pediatric group?
Well, I don't recollect any case like that. It's, what we see is left ventricular hypertrophy if the hypertension is long-standing. In fact, more often, we don't see left ventricular hypertrophy. That is the other peculiarity about it. Unlike adults, where the hypertension has been of quite some duration, in children, they come relatively early if it is. Usual cases that come to the cardiologist's attention are those who have hypertension due to a secondary cause, like one of those which we mentioned.
Aswath, I will ask you a basic question. We always say 95 percentile. Do you have any chart to find out what is the percentile in that particular age in their community? Is there any chart or anything which you
Yes,
can?
sir. You can download it from the Indian Academy of Pediatrics website. It can be found on the net, sir. We have Indian data. We do not follow what is there in the Nelson's textbook of pediatrics. We have Indian data for different age groups. Newborns, especially premature newborns, it's very difficult to get centiles. So there even we are not very sure what is shock in a newborn, what is hypertension in a newborn. So we look at the trend of the blood pressure rather than the absolute values. But your answer is a very valid answer because India's body mass index, our build is very different. And because most of them are born IUGR, even lower BPs probably need to be targeted in our population because of this fetal origin of adult disease. We are a different phenotype from what the American books are describing, sir.
Aswath, in a renal problem, you can get acute hypertension in the form of glomerular nephritis, or it can be chronic in the form of renovascular hypertension. What is your comment?
Absolutely. So that is where the ultrasound comes in very handy, sir. If it's an acute glomerular nephritis, I will see normal sized kidney with regular kidney margins with loss of corticomedullary function distinction. Whereas if the child has had a chronic glomerular nephritis or a chronic renal disease, I will see an irregularly contracted shrunken kidneys. So the ultrasound is one simple, inexpensive test which I can say with confidence whether this is an acute problem or a chronic problem. Just look at the kidney size.
Will you do renal biopsy in those cases?
Absolutely, sir. In SLE with renovascular disease, if there is lupus nephritis, the prognosis will be driven only by the class of the WHO classification of lupus nephritis. So treatment will be different for different WHO classes of lupus nephritis. We will check it. The other common phenotype where we do it is for IgA nephropathy or focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. These are nephrotic syndromes which are atypical. They will come with hypertension.
How do you manage SLE? What is the treatment you follow?
So in order to protect them from photosensitivity, it is recommended that these children receive HCQ after ECG and their retinal and hearing evaluation. The next drug that we will give will be a steroid to suppress the active lupus nephritis or active lupus disease. Once the acute markers of inflammation have come down, then different people have different ways of approaching. Broadly, we use some sort of immunosuppression. There are some people who will prefer azathioprine, some people will prefer mycophenolate mofetil, some people will give pulse endoxan because it is very cheap, that's cyclophosphamide. But because many of them are girl children, we do not want to use too much of endoxan because of the probable effect on ovarian maturity, sterility. So there is definitely ethical issue here. Endoxan is cheap, but it is ovariotoxic.
Yeah. Sarachandra, how do you estimate LVH from ECG in pediatrics? Is there any separate classification for pediatric LVH?
No, I'm not aware of anything like that, but
go ahead. Aswath, do you take ECG regularly for pediatrics?
Yes, sir. In order to look at the possibility, because ECG is a very good clue to again tell us whether there is a chronic hypertension or an acute hypertension. If you have voltage criteria for left ventricular hypertension present on the ECG, that is a pointer for me to say that this hypertension is a chronic hypertension. The correlate will be the left ventricular hypertrophy, which Dr. Sarath will see on the echo. To say this is left ventricular hypertrophy, we have voltage criteria which are given in Park's pediatric cardiology books. We have criteria. There are 98th percentile, 95th percentile for the height of the R wave in the left ventricular lead. Lead V5, V6, we look at the RS ratio and we look at the absolute increase in the R. So there are criteria to say, yes, you meet the voltage criteria for LVH in pediatrics. We have age-specific criteria.
Okay. In your experience, have you come across any essential hypertension pediatric case which they are taking lifelong medicine till they become adult, and then still they are taking medicine, and how long they should take? Is there any remission in the pediatric hypertension group? Primary.
That's a very, very important question, sir, because this is what we call for both these two conditions, which are going to really become big health issues in India. One is obesity, the second is hypertension. So we call that globesity. It's a globe-wide phenomenon. In India, it is going to hit really epidemic proportions. What happens is when we start a child who's becoming overweight, whose weight is going beyond a certain body mass index, we also see his BP going up. So beyond a certain age, an obese adolescent becomes an obese adult. An obese hypertensive becomes an adult obese hypertensive. So this is called the phenomenon of tracking. So if you're seeing a child who's got a BP which is sustainably above the 90th percentile for age and sex, we have to be very, very careful when we make a transition to adult life that this child's BP continues to be tracked. That is why we are going for primordial prevention rather than trying to give discourses saying do this, do that. Catch them young, treat them young, make sure they enter adulthood with normal blood pressure centiles without evidence of any end organ injury. That is the mantra.
And what is the salt intake for children? Is there any different from adults?
Yes, sir. That is what I told you. It is called the DASH protocol. This is endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics based on the evidence-based medicine. Lots of papers. The average Caucasian salt intake for healthy heart to keep hypertension under control is said to be 2.3 grams.
Yeah, that's for
Then we
adults.
have some, that is for children, sir. I'm talking about children. This is called DASH diet.
Yeah,
Those are
even adults that much only. Okay. In the DASH diet, we advise more of vegetables and fruits. Do you also follow that in the children?
absolutely, sir. Yes. 50 to 60% of what's on the plate should come from fruits, vegetables, cereals, and legumes. Animal fat, lean meat, fish should come to about 20 to 50%. Salty foods, salty beverages, snacks, salty snacks, cheesy foods, fried fish, red meat should probably be less than 5% of the diet, preferably avoid if at all feasible.
In the metabolic syndrome, do you use metformin?
In my experience, no, sir. We use metformin primarily for controlling PCOS in adolescent girls, where obesity is also part of the PCOS syndrome. I personally have not had experience using metformin, sir.
And in our adult, we say systolic hypertension, diastolic hypertension. Do you have any particular diastolic hypertension in children or in the systolic hypertension in children? Is there any entity like that?
Yes, sir. We have 5th percentile, 10th percentile, 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th, 90th, 95th, and 99th percentile. So we have separate charts for boys, girls. We have separate charts for systolic, diastolic. So all we do is we look at the Indian data. We have the nomograms in our clinic. We look at the child's blood pressure, feed in the weight of the child, the sex of the child, the height of the child, the body mass index, and then we take the measurements and we look at the systolic and diastolic blood pressures. We have centiles. Yes.
Okay, because we say isolated diastolic pressure, isolated diastolic hypertension, isolated systolic hypertension. Is there any such entity in children called isolated diastolic hypertension?
No, sir. Not that I know of, sir. No.
Okay. Because we always say the blood pressure after 50 years it will be systolic, and below 50 years it only be diastolic will be more. Sarath Chandra, what is your opinion? Sarat Chandra? Sarat, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. No, I'm not aware of a pediatric age group having a special entity like that. You know, the pediatrician should be able to answer it.
Okay.
And not
Doesn't
seen any.
doesn't matter. In the neonatal, umbilical vein catheterization, will it lead to any hypertension? Umbilical vein or umbilical artery catheterization for some reason?
Umbilical vein catheterization, because it goes into the falciform ligament, it goes into the portal vein, it crosses the ductus venosus and enters the IVC. If at all we get complications, they will be related to liver cell. So we will see portal vein thrombosis, we will see injury in the liver cell. The real threat in the umbilical vessel catheterization is from the umbilical artery catheterization, especially if you have malpositioned it in front of the celiac axis or the superior mesenteric axis or over the renal artery, and by chance the staff nurse connects some vasopressor like dopamine or adrenaline, we can get into serious trouble. The entire gut can go for ischemic necrosis. We can have a picture very similar to necrotizing enterocolitis. It happens all the time.
And what do you advise for mass screening in children? In school children, do you advise to check for the blood pressure in a mass screening? You do
Yes,
a lot
sir.
of
That is part and parcel of the annual school health examination. It is mandatory. Any child beyond the age of 3 years should have an annual blood pressure check. There is absolutely no two ways about it. It is a must.
Rajshekhar, so far
Yes.
you are silent. Tell me something about pediatric hypertension, what you learned in the past 2-3 days.
Sir, pediatric hypertension, he has been talking about the percentile, and many must know what is percentage, what is percentile. So what is the difference between percentage and percentile? The percentile, that is the mathematical value presented out of 100, is percentage. Percentile is the percent of values below a specific value. The percentage is means of comparing quantities. That is, a percentile is used to display a position or ranking. It is a ranking system. In other words, a percentile is defined as the percentage of values found under the specific values, as our pediatrician has pointed out. Percentiles are mostly used in the ranking system. As I have told you, it is based on dividing in the normal distribution of the values. So percentile is represented as a tenth, and where X is a number. So another point, important thing, sir, he was talking about this ECG analysis to detect left ventricular hypertrophy. There is a latest pediatric guidelines. ECG is not a validated tool to assess LVH in pediatric age group. It is only the echo is mandatory. Another point I wanted to point out. And
Yeah.
another point, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
No, go ahead.
And another point, sir, that is the latest study, that is the maternal preeclampsia was associated with a higher offspring blood pressure. Please note, maternal preeclampsia was associated with the higher offspring systolic blood pressure from early childhood to adolescence. These associations were attenuated by a higher cord blood 25 hydroxy vitamin levels in a dose response fashion. So additional studies are on the way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajshekhar. Aswath, I cannot leave you without asking a tempting question. What about this COVID times, COVID and hypertension? And in the COVID time, how do you screen? How do you follow up? How do you treat hypertension? And what is the relationship between the children's COVID and hypertension or any other disorders?
So it is the exact opposite that we are worried about, sir. Like we have been talking over the phone in the past 1 week, I've been saying there are a lot of children who are coming with a dengue-like picture, with a septic shock-like picture. These are children who are coming with fever, with cold clammy peripheries, with unrecordable BPs or low systolic blood pressures and hepatomegaly, thready pulse, increased capillary filling time with hepatomegaly. When we investigate them, we find CRP is 250. We find platelet count is 130,000, which is not in keeping with the dengue picture. Their dengue serology is negative. Their ESR is under 200. Their liver enzymes are only mildly elevated. Their D dimers are elevated. So in the COVID scenario, especially in children post-COVID, we are seeing hypotension, myocarditis, LV dysfunction, coronary artery involvement, a pseudo Kawasaki syndrome, if you want to call that. We are seeing the extreme opposite, sir. We are seeing a lot of cardiogenic shock in children a month or so after the adult COVID cases peak in that community. Not hypertension, but hypotension.
Yeah, in adults, we see COVID, followed COVID, they have diabetes, they have hypertension. But in children, you are saying only hypotension and this autoimmunity called MIS-C.
Correct, sir.
Okay. And in the MIS-C, there is no endocrine involvement and then thereby developing hypertension?
No, sir. The disease itself is only 4 months old, sir. From April 2020 only, we have started studying this in a systematic manner. In April 2020, when the cases started coming from Europe, they didn't know what to call it. So the first paper which came from Italy said immediately there has been a sudden increase in the incidence of Kawasaki disease in our children. That is what they first put it in the internet. They thought there was an absolute increase in the number of Kawasaki. And only when they studied the data, they found that there were a lot of differences between Kawasaki and these children. And then they scratched their head and that whether these people are actually post-COVID Kawasaki-like disease rather than Kawasaki. And then the experts start up and said, these will be the diagnostic criteria. These will be the clinical features to look for. So the long-term follow-up of this so-called pseudo Kawasaki presentation of COVID patients is going to be an ongoing process. The whole disease is only 4 or 5 months old. We do not know how these children will do in the future. We have to wait and see.
Because, you had said it's multi-glandular involvement. So maybe because of some glandular involvement, they may develop hypertension also in the future. That's why I asked this question.
Possibly.
That's why I asked this imaginary question, but still it's a logic question. Yeah. Okay. Now I think it's time now. Rajshekhar, give me your final message for the audience.
Sir, thank you, sir. Like adult hypertension, the pediatric hypertension usually not an essential. Usually we must rule out the secondary causes. So that is all very important. And another point, pediatric age group, we have to keep an appropriate referral. And as he says, that is the kidney assessment and all is very important. Thank you, sir.
Sarachandra, your final message to all our audience. Sarachandra?
Yes, Dr. Rajshekhar said, secondary hypertension should always be looked for in this age group. Just like in very adult patients, elderly patients, first time coming with hypertension, we look for secondary hypertension. Here also secondary hypertension is important. At the same time, we should recognize and accept that the age when you start saying that essential hypertension starts is coming down progressively, and with metabolic syndrome becoming so much common, you will continue to see more and more cases of so-called essential hypertension in the pediatric age group. Aggressively, one needs to screen these patients for hypertension and treat them wherever it is appropriate. Thank you.
Okay. Aswath, before your final message, please once again tell me about the reverse encephalopathy with sudden blindness. So emphasize, reinstate. Yeah, Aswath, please.
PR, reverse encephalopathy, posterior reversible.
Encephalopathy. Aswath?
Yes, sir.
You kindly
You want some more information on pressure?
Yes.
Loss of vision and all.
Because that we should not miss.
This is correct. So one of the ways hypertensive encephalopathy presents to a pediatrician is an acute encephalopathy. In that encephalopathy, very many DDs will be there. We can look for trauma, we can look for toxins, we can look for hypertension, we can look for scarpin envenomation, so many causes. But one of the most important features of this hypertensive encephalopathy is all the three vascular territories, the anterior cerebral artery, the middle and the posterior cerebral artery, do not behave in the same way to a sudden increase in the blood pressure. People have postulated that there are a lot of pericytic neurons which are not able to safeguard the posterior cerebral artery from a rapidly rising BP. So because of this lack of the pericytic neuronal control over the surge in BP, the posterior cerebral artery gets a disproportionately high amounts of blood flow, leading to cytotoxic edema. So when you see an MRI, you will see a lot of white matter changes in the territory of the posterior cerebral artery, mainly the occipital lobes. And that correlates with headache and diplopia, loss of vision, amaurosis. Then these children may or may not have papilledema. So when you have a child with poor vision whose fundi do not show papilledema, in the setting of hypertension, MRI is the most sensitive test for making a diagnosis of PRES. And the good news is, if you recognize and treat it, these people make complete recovery. They don't lose their vision after the hypertensive episode is got better. They come back with normal vision.
Do you
Wonderful.
use IV parenteral drugs for these people? Parenteral IV hypertensive, antihypertensive?
Yes, sir, of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, sir. IV labetalol is what we commonly use.
Okay. Now your final message, Aswath.
My humble request is, like I'm repeatedly saying, please screen the blood pressure of apparently healthy children after the age of 3 years using an age-appropriate cuff, or at least instruct the staff nurses who are doing this while the patient is waiting to see you. Younger the child, the higher the chance of secondary hypertension. Older the child, higher the chance of primary hypertension. So if you see a 2-year-old, 3-year-old child with hypertension, please look at least at the kidneys, a urine analysis and electrolytes and the heart. Please be aware of subtle clues like Cushing syndrome, like Turner's phenotype, like dysmorphic features, like abdominal striae, which are very, very easy to pick up even in a very busy OPD, because they may all that may be needed to pick up a secondary hypertension. That's all.
Yeah,
Sir,
thank you. Rashek, yes.
Sir, we have been talking about the coarctation of aorta. The clinical examination is important. That is why physical examination, all peripheral accessible vessels should be felt. Another important point, as coarctation of aorta is advancing, patients who develop collaterals, especially in the inferior angle of scapula, we hear a continuous murmur that is called Sussman's sign. That's one to have a highlight. And regarding the home BP monitoring, usually the latest pediatric guidelines, they don't recommend home BP monitoring. They recommend only ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Thank you, sir.
When you say coarctation, I always tell children are God. So what do you mean by children are God? You touch their feet. That's like, God, you touch their feet, you can feel the pulse. And Aswath and Sarachandra, my passion for the last few years and ambition to start many hypertension clinics all over the country, because we have got more diabetologists. We don't have hypertensionologists or hypertension specialists. So though our adult or pediatric, they should have hypertension clinic. That is why I requested all of them to buy BP cuff, the first webinar. I'm glad at least 10 to 15 people have said they've already bought a small BP cuff. That's a good news. Another thing also, lifestyle modification plays a very, very important role in children to prevent the hypertension, because all of us, we think our children should be fat and healthy. They think only fatty people are healthy. That misconception should be removed from the patients, and you must advise a good physical exercise, meditation, yoga, and whatever the children can learn. And then about the diet also, you should give an education for the diet also, because in the school curriculum we must add lifestyle modification as one of the education material. This is what we are telling to the education institutions and the policy makers. So with this, I conclude. Thank you, Dr. Sarachandra, for the wonderful presentation. I am glad your enthusiasm about learning new things. Very, very impressive, Sarachandra. And we will have some more association with you. And Aswath, as usual, you are, you are the master stroke player today. The IPL, you have given sixers like Virat Kohli. Very happy, Aswath. That clinical.
Thank you for your kindness, sir. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to reach out to this very enlightened audience. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, really good. And of course, my brother and treasurer, Dr. Rashekar. So thank you very much. If there are any questions unanswered, please send it to me or Rashekar. If we don't know, we'll get the answers from Aswath and Sarachandra and post it in our WhatsApp group. Please be active in the WhatsApp group. Don't forget, tomorrow 9 p.m. Dr. Rashekar is going to be the speaker for hypertension in elderly. And a very good news is one of the internationally known doctor by name Silver, who is a geriatrician, is going to be the panel for us. So he'll be giving a lot of expert comments He's from US and he's also going to join us tomorrow. So don't miss it. Please tell your friends, tell all your
Sir,
WhatsApp groups.
I just want to say this is a wonderful session and very, very enlightening. I wish more and more people joined this kind of discussion. Very impressive, I must say, to say the least. Congratulations, sir, for organizing such a beautiful session.
Sarachandra, believe me, this is my 14th hypertension program. Nobody,
Okay.
nowhere in our country, people will join for 14 webinars continuously. You know, every Friday, Saturday, for the last 14 webinars they are attending. The attendance is not less than 350, 400. And we also have Facebook and YouTube link. And our
Okay.
records are there in YouTube. So many people who are not attending, they call for us and then get the video link. Even Bidita, Dr. Bidita, who is in ICU COVID ward, she had just messaged me, please send the video tomorrow, sir, for me to see. So everybody is interested to learn. And this is the high time that, you know, I am focusing on hypertension, and a lot of good things are going on. With all your support, I think my dream of achieving hypertensionist and hypertensionologist and hypertension clinic will be not far away. With this, this is Dr. Muruganathan signing off from all of you. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you all.
Good night.